start the presentation here, I want to show you some pictures from the family album. It's Biola's birthday, so happy birthday to Biola. Yeah. And I want to, it'll be story time. I really want to tell you one of the stories of Biola's history. Is that up there yet? Nope. Waiting for a picture. I want to tell you the story of the Fundamentals. The Fundamentals were a set of books that Biola really was responsible for publishing, though the story goes back a little bit before that. And it's a set of, I'm still waiting for a picture here. Anyone help me? There we go. Oh, look at those things. It's a set of 12 books. They came out from 1910 to 1915, so we're in the centennial period for these books. There were 12 volumes. They ended up with about 3 million copies of these things in print. About a third of those went overseas, though they were in English, and we're not dealing with translations here. And the really interesting thing about these is that they were free. So 100 years ago, there actually wasn't an internet yet. And so to give people free information like this, you couldn't just post it on your website. You had to actually print this stuff and mail this stuff. And so Biola was a principal player in getting these 12 volumes of free books in the hands of anybody who wanted them. That's the story that I want to tell you. I've been at Biola 15 years. When I first came here, I said, I'd like to really belong to a place where I work. Is there a book I could read about Biola? And everyone said, no, there's not really a book. There's some booklets, but we don't really have a history written down. And I thought, I know what that's like. When the family story has missing chapters in it that nobody talks about, there's probably something we're ashamed of. We were probably founded by snake-handling Chigger Creek bigots or something like that, right? And so we just don't talk about it. You know, we're moving into the future and we're trying to make something better than where we came from. I totally get that. That's probably what's going on here. But I'm naturally curious and suspicious, so I kind of wanted to know and started looking in all the closets. Here's the good news. I didn't find any really big skeletons. The really good news, as I dug through those closets, is I found all kinds of gold. I found amazing stuff in our heritage. So one of the things I want to share with you this morning is you've got a heritage here at Biola that you can be proud of. And I say you on purpose, because it's not just I'm telling our story of Biola, but I'm really wanting to put it out there for you to take ownership of, to say, this is who I am, this is part of my heritage here. One little bit of it, I just want to show you the fundamentals this morning. The fundamentals have a lot of people involved. I'll tell you where to get more details on that later, but two of the key players were Lyman Stewart, standing right there, wearing a nice hat on his head, looking at you with his arms crossed as if to say, are you handling my money well and being responsible with the spiritual legacy I've left you? And the other guy is R.A. Torrey, standing over there with a tall hat on his head, world-traveling evangelist. People said of R.A. Torrey, he often wore a tall hat, but he always spoke to audiences as if he were wearing a tall hat. So, Dr. Torrey. These two men carried a lot of gravitas. I want to start, though, with Lyman Stewart. There he is, 1840 to 1923. He and his brother Milton were both oil millionaires. And here's an article about them, the Stewarts as Christian stewards. These guys were incredibly generous Christian philanthropists. They were in the oil industry practically before there was an oil industry. Lyman is one of the guys who founded the Union Oil Company. And it was a rough kind of a lifestyle, so there was a lot of buzz about the fact that, hey, there's this oil millionaire who's a Christian, like a real live, actual evangelical Christian. He'll witness to you if you're not careful. He's that kind of a Christian. And Lyman and Milton, they were independently millionaires, and they would sometimes team up to do double millionaire stuff for big projects. And they would just give money all over the place. They were paying the salaries of Bible teachers, and they were supporting missionaries, and they were printing crates and crates of evangelistic literature to send all over the world, especially into Latin America. Lyman Stewart had, I'm going to go back actually. Lyman Stewart had a number of good ideas. Three of his biggest ideas were, one, start the Union Oil Company and make even more money. Number two, start Biola. That was one of his good ideas. But I'd say his other really big idea was the fundamentals. He came up with this idea of printing and sending a lot of good Christian teaching all over the place to anybody who wanted it. It's a really radical idea from 100 years ago. Here's what he wrote to his brother, Milton, in 1909. This is one millionaire writing to another, just kind of talking over old times. We both doubtless have plans for accomplishing some good with the means which the Lord has so graciously entrusted to us. But there are dangers that threaten defeat to our purposes. The channels through which we may have expected to accomplish some good may become so corrupted as to become channels of evil rather than of blessing. See what he's worried about there? It's as if there's a pipeline. He's putting good in one side, but the pipeline's gone bad, so evil comes out the other end. He's very nervous about this. He wants to give money intelligently. He's got that philanthropist's motto, especially for Christian philanthropists: first, do no harm. Kind of a Hippocratic oath of money giving. Right? Give money in such a way that you're not accidentally doing evil with it. Lyman goes on and tells Milton, if the channels, that is the schools that we want to give money to and the teachers that we want to support, if the channels are corrupt, the streams of instruction must necessarily become impure. The fountain, the word of truth, is pure, but the channels need cleansing. There are doubtless thousands of good, honest men today preaching error. This is a weird sentence. Good, honest men preaching error. Why? Is it because they're evil? Because they're wolves in sheep's clothing? Not these men. It's because they don't know the truth. They follow and teach the errors of the schools in which they themselves have been taught, and of the literature which these same false teachers have put into their hands. They don't know that they are teaching error. This is the problem as Lyman Stewart saw it. So if you're a millionaire, you got all the money in the world, and you want to support Christian ministry, and you just start giving money to support it, but the people doing the teaching have been taught false doctrine at the schools they went to, or they're getting false doctrine in the books that they're purchasing and reading and studying. That's what he means by the channels are impure. Well, what do you do about it? How do you cleanse those channels? Well, this is a picture of a Bible institute. Dwight Moody was the guy who thought of this plan of not building a university, not building a college, not building a seminary. Those already existed. Some of them were doing a good job. Some of them, by the late 19th century, had become centers of unorthodox teaching. And so Moody kind of invented the idea of a Bible Institute as an emergency measure. And you can see here in this political cartoon, the great Bible Institute there is standing against this sea of unbelief, which is threatening to come in and flood the town. And nothing is in between the poor, innocent town and the sea of unbelief except the Bible Institute, built on a gigantic Bible. Right? See that gigantic Bible down there? So this is the plan, to support Bible institutes and give people the kind of training they need to be able to tell truth from error. Now, this is in a situation late in the 19th century where something called modernism or theological liberalism was creeping in. And what you were getting, the kind of confusion in this situation is, good Bible-believing Christians would go to church. It's Easter Sunday. They'd get dressed up all nice, and they'd go, and the pastor would say, we celebrate today Easter, the day on which the faith of the apostles rose as if from the grave. And you'd think, wait, what now? Go back to the part about Easter, and the pastor would say, yes, Easter Sunday, the most holy day in our sacred religion, when the faith of the apostles rose as if from the dead. You think, now, pastor, I'm not professionally trained, but I just have a question, like, did Jesus bodily get out of the grave? And then the pastor would say 3 or 4 long, complex sentences that he learned in seminary, and you'd still be thinking, now, I'm not trying to be a know-nothing, and I'm not trying to be hard-headed here. I just literally want to know some specific questions. Is Jesus alive or dead? And the pastor would say something sometimes beautiful, like, oh, just as the flowers bloom forth from the earth, and this on and on this would go. Eventually, people get upset about this and start saying things like, I think the channels are impure here. Right? I think the word of truth has not come into my church in a pure way. I think you're teaching all kinds of weird stuff. And so the Bible Institute was to train an army of godly lay people, not to give them a full-on seminary education, but to teach them how to handle the Word of God correctly. Now, if that's pretty much the Moody Bible Institute there, holding back, I suppose that must be Lake Superior about to flood Chicago. The connection to us is, there's the original Bible Institute of Los Angeles in downtown LA, also built upon a giant Bible. Apparently they had lots of giant Bibles back then to build buildings on. You can see here, one in Chicago and one in Los Angeles. The plan is to train an army of godly lay people to know the truth. There's been a kind of a betrayal of the people in the pews. There's been a treason of the clerics, where a lot of people have been trained and are teaching false doctrine. Many of them not even intending to, just teaching what they've got in school. So there you go, both ends of Route 66, which hadn't been built yet, from Chicago to LA. And that's the plan. Lyman Stewart decides to carry that out here, but another idea running on the same track is, we've got to get better teaching into people's hands, and we're gonna print it, and we're gonna send it to them free. Now, here is the foreword to the first volume of the 12-volume set of the Fundamentals. Lyman and Milton published it anonymously. They said it's compliments of two Christian laymen, right? We're not pastors, we're not priests, we're lay people who are concerned and are giving this to you. This volume 1 said, "This book is the first of a series which will be published and sent to every pastor, evangelist, missionary, theological professor, theological student, Sunday school superintendent, YMCA and YWCA secretary in the English-speaking world, so far as the address of all these can be obtained. Two intelligent, concerned Christian laymen bear the expense." They're very modest, even though they call themselves very intelligent here. Maybe someone else wrote this. "Because they believe that the time has come when a new statement of the fundamentals of Christianity should be made. Their earnest desire is that you will carefully read it and pass its truth on to others." So it's a massive publishing project that Lyman and Milton Stewart organized. And the idea of this direct mail campaign where all you've got to do is get us your address and tell us you want it, and we will send this to you. It's a broad ecumenical coalition, too. They're sending it without regard to denominational boundaries. In these initial years, they're even sending them to Roman Catholics to try to say, boy, we really disagree as Protestants with a lot of Roman Catholic stuff, but when it comes to this circle of the fundamentals, we think this will help you even in the Roman Catholic Church. These are the three men charged with editing, one after another. So first, A.C. Dixon was the editor. He did a lot of the initial organizing work. And then Lewis Meyer became the editor and did, I think, if I understand right from Paul Rood's historical work on this, which I'll mention later, he did really the lion's share of the organizing. And then our man, R.A. Torrey, who was hired here to be the academic dean at Biola, 1912 to 1924. Torrey, by the way, was Dwight Moody's right-hand man. He was kind of Moody's general who carried things out. And we intentionally went out with a big checkbook and swiped him from Moody and said, we'd like that guy. So he came here and was our dean and finished up editing the last 2 volumes of the Fundamentals. So the Fundamentals, in one sense, is bigger than Biola. It's a large project that Lyman and Milton Stewart undertook, but it really comes to live here because it's that Stewart money and it's R.A. Torrey's editorial hand in the end. So that's 2 of our major founders, and I'm sure Horton helped somehow, though I don't know how. Well, this is the stack of books. My personal copy of the Fundamentals used to belong to a great Southern California preacher, Ray Ortland. And these books, remember, there are 90 chapters. So in the short time we have together this morning, if I just read you the titles of all 90 chapters, we'd take up the entire chapel time. I won't do that. I'll just indicate to you, it's a complete systematic theology. It covers all the major doctrines. It's a lot about missions. There are several testimonies in it. The chapters aren't always what you would expect. I'm kind of a Trinity-obsessed person, so as soon as I got my first copy of the Fundamentals, I went into it and said, where's the Trinity chapter? And there wasn't one. And again, I thought, uh-oh, skeleton in the closet, bad juju. But I kept digging, and I realized, oh, without having a Trinity chapter, this is richly Trinitarian. This is plain old Christianity. 90 chapters, really solid stuff. Let me take an angle on this where I show you some of the authors, because 90 chapters in 12 volumes takes a lot of people to write. Let me say one other thing about those 90 chapters, though. When you hear the fundamentals at the beginning of the 20th century, you might think about fundamentalism. We'll talk about that in a minute. This is not fundamentalism. And this is also not a short list of the 5 things you've got to believe or we'll kick you out of our church. A lot of times you think of the fundamentals that way. No, this is 90 chapters of stuff, and it's very broad. So it's not a short, small, contracted list of just a handful of things we've decided to major on. It's a decision to major on all the main things. It's hard for us at this point to hear the word fundamentals as referring to a large circle, a comprehensive and inclusive circle of all the main things. There's no rescuing the word fundamentals, even though I've got these books and think there's nothing wrong with them in 1910 to 1915. This is not 1910 or 1915. You can't go out saying, you know what I love? Fundamentalism, right? The newspapers will report you as being a terrorist, right? That's just how that's going to happen. There's no saving this word. But bear in mind, it's something like the principles or the elements of Christianity. Yeah? Here are some of the main people. James Orr and B.B. Warfield. James Orr is in Scotland, so we've got a lot of UK contributors and contributors from Canada. B.B. Warfield's at Princeton. Now, R.A. Torrey is also writing several chapters in here, and these are important thinkers and writers. These are some of the best people writing at the time in the early 20th century. And they don't get along with each other on all sorts of issues. I mean, R.A. Torrey is a dispensationalist, and B.B. Warfield is absolutely not a dispensationalist. And yet, they agree to get together and say, let's not write about those elements that are controversial and that divide us. Let's just all gang up and teach against this liberal theology, this modernism, which denies all miracles and tries to have Christianity anyway. That's one way to think about liberal theology. Total denial of the possibility of miracles and an attempt to have Christianity anyway. That's why your sermons on the resurrection have to be very long and very vague, right? Because no miracle happened there. Something else happened, and it's great. Anyway, B.B. Warfield, James Orr, I just wanted to show you all their faces because they're such handsome gentlemen. And you can see that neckwear was different back then and beards galore. Yeah. Philip Mauro there was on the rescue ship where it was the first one to get to the Titanic as it sank. G. Campbell Morgan taught here at Biola for 2 years. Major preacher. A.T. Pearson. Handley Mole was the evangelical Anglican Bishop of Durham. W.H. Griffith Thomas. Thomas Spurgeon, son of Charles Spurgeon. I put in here Thomas Boston, who obviously was dead by 1732. They didn't have a seance and have him write something. They got to the chapter on regeneration and said, we could write a new chapter on being born again, but Thomas Boston nailed it so perfectly, we just need to republish the 12 pages he wrote. So I can't really make a list of what it took for you to be an author in the fundamentals, because they would sort of break their principles at a whim, all the greatest living authors, and that dead guy. So they would just go for it. But they didn't extend it further back in time and say, let's just gather all the classics. It was mainly new writing from trusted, recognized names. And I put on here not Andrew Murray, because Andrew Murray is one of my favorite writers, but he's very old at this point, and he wanted to contribute, but he couldn't. But just to let you know if you're a Murray fan. James Gray of the Moody Bible Institute, Robert Spear, Presbyterian, C.T. Studd, his name was Studd. And he was not really a theologian. He was a famous cricket player in England, in Cambridge, but he was part of this missionary movement from Cambridge who went out to the ends of the earth. And he had a lot of credibility because, they like cricket. So even in his headshot, it's not a headshot, it's him leaning on a cricket bat or whatever they use in cricket, I don't even know. Jessie Penn Lewis, the only female author of the 90 chapters, she wrote on spiritual warfare. That was what she was famous for teaching on back at that time. Okay, that's a broad overview. I wish I could talk you through some of the theology of the fundamentals, but again, there's 90 chapters, so it's not like I can just tick off 5 things that were important to them or 3 things. It really is the scope of Christian doctrine, and in an attempt to put in the hands of people who want to teach the truth what they need to get the job done. There they are, 12 volumes. It's a substantial little library. Now, I want to compare the fundamentals, 1910 to 1915, to 2 other projects that are going on. You've got this rising tide of modernist theology, of liberal theology, that's denying miracles, that's rethinking all kinds of Christian doctrines in ways that leave the faithful in the pews without Christian doctrine anymore. And so the fundamentals come out, and they say, we're going to teach the truth. Now, I want to put that in between 2 other responses. One response could be, okay, I get it, all you smart German scholars from 19th century. You're teaching this scientific non-Christianity under the guise of Christianity. We're going to outthink you, outpublish you, and win the arguments in the scholarly journals. That's one way to go, and James Orr, who contributed 3 chapters to the fundamentals, actually went that route. Orr, from Scotland, edited something called the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia. It was cutting-edge, top-level scholarship. He actually went out and got people who were open to the new critical insights, because there was a lot of truth in some of that new critical theology that was coming in the 19th century, a greater awareness of history, a greater flexibility of interpretation. He wanted to take all that on, assign these topics to major scholars, and have them come out affirming the essential core of Christianity. So this was the opportunity to rise to the highest level of scholarship and win the fight at that level. Orr was also a brilliant editor who was able to bring together a truly international team in a way that was cutting edge and hadn't been done before. So the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia, coming out at exactly the same time and using some of the same talent. So that's going on, but it's not what the fundamentals about. Don't think of the fundamentals as the best, highest level scholarship that wins the case for Christ. That's going on in another project, the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia. At the other side, though, you could say, liberal theology sweeping in, you know what we need to do? We need to have a big show trial where we just shame Christian America into minding its manners and coming back to the old-time religion. Now, that's more like the Scopes monkey trial that broke out, where there's a debate over Genesis and the origin of life and Darwinism and all that's coming together. Lots of things need to be done in that argument at that time, but for some reason, a lot of Christians decided the thing to do is to have a public show trial and have William Jennings Bryan, a politician, be the advocate in public for the truth of the Christian faith. Well, he's woefully ill-equipped, although frankly, Bryan, of course, won the Scopes monkey trial, and Scopes was fined something like $10 for teaching that. And of course, I'd say the conservative evangelicals won the battle there and utterly lost the war. Because you look back now at the Scopes trial and say, that's really when bad fundamentalism started, when a kind of a separatist fundamentalism kicked in. And some of my good friends are in churches and preach in churches with the word fundamentalist in the title. So I'm not trying to scapegoat fundamentalism. I'm just saying that's a sort of an extreme to the right approach to taking on these challenges that are coming on. Notice that that's not what the fundamentals are doing either, right? So on the one hand, you've got, let's do the top level scholarship and win. On the other side, you've got, no, let's just do a public show trial and embarrass these liberals. In the middle, what you've got is the fundamentals. And this is the project that Lyman Stewart thinks of. What we need to do is get good teaching into people's hands so that they will be able to teach the truth and bring the people in the pews along with them. That's how we're going to solve all of this. Now, I'd say I'm a lover, not a fighter, and I'd like to just teach the truth instead of attack all the time also. It's hard to divide the two tasks sometimes, though, right? You remember the passage at the beginning of Jude, where Jude says, I wanted to write to you about the salvation that we have in common, but then I realized there were these troublemakers, so I needed to write to you and tell you to earnestly contend for the faith that was once delivered to us. Right? That's very much the spirit of the fundamentals. The 90 chapters, and what they want to talk about is the salvation that we have in common. But because some troublemakers have slipped in, quite a few of the pages need to be devoted to contending for the truth. So there are some feisty sides, and there are some very negative articles in there that go after and attack what they view as false doctrine. But the fundamental task is a widespread, free to the user, of course it cost Lyman and Milton Stewart a lot, free educational undertaking. This is, I think, what really puts the fundamentals in Biola's ballpark, because we have lots of different approaches in the history of Biola to dealing with doctrinal deviations. But what is our what is our basic approach to false doctrine? It's teach the truth, teach more of the truth, teach it all the time to anyone who will listen in any venue we can get. Just constantly keep sowing the good seed of the word and putting it out there. We'll fight when we have to. We'll do high-level scholarship of ISBI standards, of course, now that we are a university. But the main thing we exist for as a university is to teach the truth. That's the fundamentals. I can draw 3 quick lessons from what happened in the fundamentals. Number 1, we have a heritage to be proud of. Again, I'm cynical and suspicious by nature, so when I got here, I had to do the digging myself and figure out if there were embarrassing things and if we had crazy uncles in the attic or something like that. I wanted to know about it. You could take my testimony or you could do your own digging in the primary sources. We're increasingly putting as many of the primary sources online as possible, because as I've dug into Biola's history, over and over what I've found is the worries and the rumors and the fears we have about what we might have been and where we might have come from have always been worse than where we really came from. You get that? If you actually get some sunlight on our 106-year history, we've got a lot to be proud of. So it's not just that there's nothing there to be ashamed of. I mean, there's something to be ashamed of because we're humans, right? In fact, our theology would lead you to believe, hey, we're not perfect. Our theology actually says we're not perfect. So don't look for that kind of standard. But I've been delighted every time I've dug and every time I've followed kind of my cynical tendency to investigate. I've dug somewhere and thought, this is where the dirt is. This is it. And I get to the bottom and I strike gold and say, hey, there was some awesome Bible teaching going on back there. So it really is a heritage to be proud of, and the fundamentals is just one part of what we've got as an institutional history. Second thing is to emphasize the basics. I've already said there's no way to rescue the word fundamentals. You're just not going to do it. Is it rude to say it's the new F word? It's really not a word that you're going to be able to bring back. And like, don't go out and say, what I learned in chapel this morning is to be a fundamentalist, because that's just not true to the kind of moderate, calm sort of position that Biola has consistently maintained over all these decades. It would be nice, though, if there were a word or a phrase or a way that we can emphasize the fact that, you know what we're excited about? We're excited about the basics. There is a faith once delivered to the saints. We are part of it. There's a great phrase that the Biola's founders used: no fads or fancies. Every time something really cool would come along and the Christian world would kind of be going off a cliff, just going nuts about it, Biola's founders would respond, no fads or fancies, just plain old Protestant Christianity. No fads, no fancies. They had this other phrase, you have to teach scriptural truth in scriptural proportions, right? It's sort of like, it's not enough to be biblical. You have to be biblical in the amount of biblical you are. You know what I mean? Because you can find stuff in the Bible and go, this is what I'm all about. Biola's founders would say, no. How much is that in the Bible? How important is that in the total witness of Scripture? Get your whole scriptural wits about you. Get the whole counsel of the Word of God and focus on the main things. So emphasizing the basics, that's crucial. And there's even a statement that the Biola's founders made, I think in 1924, when some imbalanced teaching was kind of spreading in Christianity in Los Angeles. And they said, Biola's never stood for extremes of any nature, except maybe extreme conservatism. Now, don't hear that in the political sense. It's a sense of, we've got the deposit of faith, and we're extreme about sticking to the deposit of faith, the main plain things that are the core of Christianity. And then from that, I go to the third point that I take away from this fundamentals project, these 90 chapters, this 12-volume free little encyclopedia of the basic truths of Christianity. That's the center point. That's the deposit of truth that we are guarding, that we're contending for when we need to. But that doesn't mean that you get the center and then you just come to the center and cluster around it and say, I'm going to just close my ears and not listen to anything new. I'm just holding on to the center. La, 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 don't talk. I already know what I think. It's all in these 90 chapters. I think that the strategy of the fundamentals is you've got to clarify what's the most important and what's at the center and what are the basics. Because the stronger the center is, the wider the circumference can be. And the vision that started this Bible Institute in Los Angeles 106 years ago is for there to be a very strong center of core, trustable, documented teaching, and then a wide circumference, really big. You can't out-visionary Biola's founders. I like a lot of people who have been in Biola's administration. I love the current administration. I think we've got visionary, exciting things going on. But when I look back and compare it to Lyman Stewart, I think, yeah, we're barely catching up with him. Lyman Stewart's the kind of guy who took a world map, looked at it, and said, let's see, Panama Canal's going here, LA Aqueduct's going here. We need a Bible Institute here, Los Angeles. You know what? Los Angeles is going to be bigger than San Francisco, way bigger. I mean, Lyman Stewart's just the kind of guy who would get out a world map and drop pins for geopolitical reasons like that and have this vision of, he'd even do some kind of smack talk against New York, like, yeah, New York, it's kind of close to Europe, and Europe's okay, but I mean, LA, right? West Coast represent. We're on the Pacific Rim. Asia's bigger, older, more needy, more populous. So we win, right? Bible Institute of Los Angeles. So we are just barely catching up with that. Lyman Stewart started a Bible Institute, not a university. We've turned into a university, but we haven't betrayed Lyman Stewart because he had this broad mind with a strong center and a wide circumference. Last thing I want to say before I dismiss you is I've only had a few minutes here to share with you a little bit about Biola's history, and I've chosen to focus on the fundamentals. Over the course of this year, there's going to be a display, actually a set of 4 displays in the library. Paul Rood, who's actually the grandson of a former Biola president. How cool is that? Paul Rood has put together a wonderful set of deeply informative displays that will be rotating through the library. You'll have plenty of time to look at them, with lots of information. So much information, so precise and well documented that if you go and learn well from them, you'll say, that Sanders guy kind of fibbed in chapel. There's more going on here, right? So anyway, that'll be great if I could sort of introduce you to the serious scholarship that's going to be present for you in the library over the course of the next year. That's basically what I wanted to say. Welcome to your story. This is Biola's heritage. It's something to be proud of. It's clear and focused. It's trustworthy. And the circumference is as big as the whole world. Let me dismiss you in prayer.
We hope you enjoyed this message. Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Learn more at biola.edu.